Hello, my name is Julie, and today it's time to do the mid-year book freakout tag. I did finally finish my last book of June, so it is time for me to do one of the best videos of the year, the mid-year book freakout tag. June wrap-up is going to be coming late, but I decided to do this tag first after finishing my last book of the first half of the year. I have tagged the original creators down below, and there are some questions that have been added to this tag over the years by other people, and I have included some of those questions not on the original. First question being, how's your reading going so far? This year, I had a distinct turnaround in my reading. If you have been following me for a bit, you know that September 2023 was my worst reading month of all time. I had an average of 3.05. I did not read a single book I liked. And from there on out, I had 5 months of pretty bad ratings. I just wasn't finding books that I loved, but once we got into April, I have returned to having a normal rating and even an above average rating for the books that I'm reading, so I have been much more enjoying myself. I have read 68 books so far this year, which is more than I read last year of 65, but I have read fewer pages. I am nearly at 26,000 this year, and this time last year I was over 27,000. My average rating, depending on what I give a couple of my June reads, is around a 3.65, which is marginally higher than where it was last year. I am projected to read 136 books by the end of the year, which is one more than I read last year. Here are some other stats for my reading this year. The next question is, what is the best book that you've read this year? This is really difficult. I, for a long time, had one set answer, but I think it has become harder as the year has gone on, and I've read so many great books. So I'm going to tell you about 3 right now that are vying for it. The first is the one that was my first favorite book of the year, and that is Yellowface by R.F. Kuang. This is a literary fiction satire about a white author who's basically her only friend is a much more successful Asian author, and she is very jealous of her, doesn't think she actually deserves it, and when she drops dead in front of the main character, she steals her manuscript. Says she's doing it to honor her friend, but it definitely spirals away from that. I could not put it down. I felt like this was so propulsive. Love how in your face with commentary R.F. Kuang is. If you need to like a main character to read the book, this is not the book to do it in because you are supposed to be angry at this main character, and I thought that R.F. Kuang did such a great job of doing that. I have hardly ever felt the amount of anger I have while reading a book as with hers. Next we have a nonfiction, which kind of makes me be like, do I want to put it in here? Just because I don't read or rate nonfiction a lot of the time, but I cannot stop thinking about this book, and that is How the Word Is Passed by Clint Smith. This is about how America reckons with its history of slavery. So Clint Smith went to a bunch of educational historical sites that all have ties to slavery in America, and he talked to all the different people who worked there and were visiting about slavery and how the places were talking about slavery. There were some places that had it at the forefront. There were some places that didn't talk about it all and actively buried it. And there were some places that, you know, if you looked hard, they would be able to tell you. This was amazingly written. He's a poet, and you can tell. I felt like I was standing right next to him during some of these chapters. He adds so many different voices that he talked to this, and I thought that it was just fantastically organized. He visited over twice the amount of places than the amount that he ended up keeping in the book, and every single place that he went had a very strong purpose, and it was just very succinct. Every single word was purposeful. Especially if you're American, I definitely recommend you read this one. And one that I didn't even give 5 stars when I first finished it, but I think it has to be one of my favorites of the year. That is The Will of the Many by James Islington. I have been in a drought of not finding new favorite fantasy series, and I think this has finally broken it. This is a slightly Roman-inspired fantasy where our main character is a prince of this kingdom that was the last one to fall to this empire called the Hierarchy. And the hierarchy rules by having people give up this magical thing called will, which is essentially part of your soul, to the people who are higher up than you in the hierarchy. Not only are you ceding political power, but you're literally giving them essentially superhuman abilities by giving them your will. Our main character has been hiding out as an orphan. He is found by someone in the hierarchy who doesn't know who he is but knows he's powerful and wants him to investigate why his brother died, who was at this school for hierarchy teenagers. And our main character is put at that school. Meanwhile, some people who do know who he is are trying to get him to join their revolution. The start of this book is kind of slow, but by the end of it, I was obsessed with every single element of this. This has some really unique things in fantasy that I really like. It has one of the highest ratings on Goodreads of a first book in a fantasy series you will ever see. If that isn't enough to sell you, please read this book. Next up, we have the best sequel I read. So last year, I had no choices to pick from. I had read maybe one book that lived up to the original, and now I have 5 books that I think lived up to the original. But first up, we do have to say which one's my favorite. Rhythm of War by Brandon Sanderson. This is my favorite series of all time. This is the 4th book. You can see how much I tabbed it up with all of the lore dumps we got. The Stormlight Archives is an epic fantasy series about a world in which these magical storms are constantly ravaging the planet, and that has affected the life there significantly. There is a war going on between humans and this other race on this planet, and we have a bunch of different characters who are slowly coming into magic and finding more about a magic that has been hidden for centuries. I still think Oathbringer is my favorite, The Way of Kings is probably number 2, and then this one and Words of Radiance I think are at the bottom, but it's still like some of the best fiction I've ever read. I love that this book focused on Navani and a lot of these scientific principles that are behind how this magic system works. If you're someone who loves hard magic systems and you haven't read this series, you're a criminal. Sorry. A book that I actually thought was an improvement upon the previous books is Iris Kelly Doesn't Date by Ashley Herring Blake. So this is a series of 3 standalone romances that are all following different members of the same friend group. So it's a companion and not really a direct sequel, but I thought that this absolutely nailed what the other books in the series that I did really like had failed at. We have Iris, who is really good at having sexual relationships. She has been shunning romance as much as she could. And there's Stevie, who is really good at romance, but she can't really get a sexual relationship off the ground because she has so much anxiety. And the 2 of them have been burned by past relationships before. After a failed one-night stand and a lie that Stevie tells, the 2 of them end up fake dating sometimes while also giving each other lessons on having a romance life and a sex life. I just thought that this absolutely nailed the 3rd act breakup. I hate 3rd act breakups in books. I think it's so unrealistic to life, but everything that happened in this conflict made so much sense, and that is make or break for a romance for me. So this is up there with like new favorite romances of all time. I have 3 other books that I thought were very good successors. We have Caliban's War by James S.A. Corey. This is the 2nd book in The Expanse, which is a space opera series. I didn't like this quite as much as book 1, but it's still one of my favorite sci-fis that I read this year. The Bullet That Missed by Richard Osman. This is the 3rd book in the Thursday Murder Club series, and this is about a group of septuagenarians who solve cold cases, and I thought that this was an improvement from book 2, and I liked it just as much as book 1. And An Education in Malice by S.T. Gibson. This is a companion to A Dowry of Blood because they are set in the same universe and have like one character and a crossover. This is a 50s reimagining of Carmilla that I loved. I just thought it was a little bit more crowded than the original book. Then we have a new release you haven't read yet, but need to get to. I did make a list at the beginning of the year of my anticipated releases, and there are some books on the list that I'm no longer sure I am going to read, but there is one left that I'm pretty sure I am that I haven't read yet. And that is The Last Murder at the End of the World by Stuart Turton. This is a speculative sort of murder mystery by the author of The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle, which I really loved. I love time travel, thought that did such a great job to do a spin on an Agatha Christie murder mystery. And this is about a group of scientists that are living on an island. To their knowledge, everybody else in the world has died of this mysterious fog, and they've been living peacefully. And then one of these scientists is found brutally murdered. Not only has that triggered the fog to roll in again, but something about it made it so nobody's memory is working right of about that night, so even the killer doesn't know that they killed him. This isn't getting the world's greatest reviews, but it sounds awesome, so I'm gonna read it anyway. And then there's your most anticipated releases for the last half of the year. We've got Winds in Truth by Brandon Sanderson. The 5th book in the Stormlight Archives is finally coming out. I think it's coming out on Christmas Eve. I cannot wait. It is going to be a 10-book series, but there is a 5-book arc, and then there is going to be a little bit of a jump to the next one. The primary characters are not going to be the same in the second arc, and I am so attached to the primary characters. I am so scared that somebody's going to die. Ashley Herring Blake has her next book coming out. It's called Make the Season Bright. This is a Christmas rom-com about ex-fiancés. After one of them leaves the other at the altar, they are being forced by their families to spend the holidays together, and they keep being set up on like Christmassy themed dates. This is the first adult rom-com that she is writing that is outside of the Bright Falls series, so highly anticipating this. We've got a book that I don't know if it is actually going to come out in 2024 because it has been pushed back 2 or 3 times. That is Heavenly Tyrant by Sharon J. Zhao. This is the sequel to Iron Widow, which is one of my favorite books. It's so fantastic. It's a YA sci-fi fantasy that is inspired by China's only female emperor. It is like Pacific Rim meets Chinese mythology, and it's fantastic. I love the romance in here, and I adore our main character and how brutal she is. This is a YA book, but it does not feel like it. We also have The Witch's Guide to Magical Innkeeping, which is the sequel to The Secret Society of Irregular Witches. This is a companion novel to that. It's just a cozy, light, witchy book that is also has a little bit of romance in it. Our main character is trying to run her aunt's inn, but there is something in her way, and the only person who seems to be able to help her is a grumpy librarian. And we've also got a novella from Emil Rio, who is the author of If We Were Villains, which this is about a group of people who are very different but always meet up in a graveyard together and then something happens? I don't know. I don't want to know anything. I just want to go in. Then we have your biggest disappointments of the year, and unfortunately, I have a good amount. I have a bunch of authors that I have enjoyed in the past that I read a new book from them and didn't enjoy them. There's the least favorite book that I've read this year, which is You Made a Fool of Death with Your Beauty by Akweke Emezi, which I have read Vivek Oji and Pet and liked them both. And this one I thought was bad on literally every front. I think our main character is a victim, and I do not understand why this is being like pitched as a romance. I knew that there was an age gap going into this, but there is way too much of a power dynamic between these two for me to think it's attractive. They don't even meet each other until halfway through the book, so there is no buildup at all. They have insta-love. This tries to have conversations about grief, and I did not think it went enough into it in a way that was just about the main character and not just the only thing that she has in common with this man she just met. We've also got, unfortunately, Business or Pleasure by Rachel Lynn Solomon. I have loved her other 2 rom-coms. The X-Talk is one of my favorites, but I did not get along with this one. Our main character is a ghostwriter, and she has a terrible one-night stand with someone, and then it turns out she is going to be ghostwriting his memoir. She is giving him sex lessons, and I hated them. They made me so uncomfortable. I just wanted to skip through them. I didn't feel any attraction between these main characters. I thought that the main character was pretty bland, and this tries to have so many conversations that it never actually succeeds in any of them. On top of that, millennial cringe humor. Also, Midnight is the Darkest Hour by Ashley Winstead, who has written 2 thrillers that I have given 5 stars, favorites of the years. I don't even know how to describe this book. This felt like it was by an entirely different author. I really didn't get along with the main character. I thought she was just really boring. I didn't get along with the plot. I didn't get along with what was like trying to be a horror element. And this also tries to have conversations about like religious extremism. I don't think it executed on those conversations very well either. I think I still gave it a 3, but I was so massively disappointed. Then we've got the biggest surprises. So the books that I didn't think I would like very much and then I ended up loving. I, who have never known men, I didn't know how I was going to feel about this, but when I read this for a vlog, my jaw was on the floor. I was like, holy shit, is that a 5-star? I think the author just totally takes you, the reader, for a loop in a way that you do not even understand until the end of the book. Our main character is the only girl in a bunker full of women who they are not allowed outside. They have been kidnapped and they do not know how they got there. Suddenly, the guards disappear and they are able to escape. I picked up The Haunting of Alejandra just on a whim at my library, and then I ended up being obsessed with it. I almost didn't even check it out from the library. That's how much I was like, nah, I don't know if this is gonna be for me. I am trying to figure out my taste in horror, and this is based on La Llorona, so it's like a ghosty, creaturey horror, but it didn't feel that way when I was actually reading it. It definitely did feel more like the internal horror of a woman who does not have control over her life. Our main character is a modern woman who, because of her husband mostly, had a entirely different life than she wanted for herself. She no longer really has her own identity and is at the brink when a creature starts showing up and threatening her and her children. This is exactly the type of horror that I like, that it pairs real life things with a horror element. And speaking of books I randomly picked up at the library, The Vanished Birds by Simon Jimenez. I feel like I've heard mixed things about his stuff. This was the last book that I read in June. I literally finished this book like an hour ago. Wow. I would have sworn to God I was gonna give this book 3 stars, like, before I read it. This could be a 5. Nia is a woman who travels at light speed all the time, so is constantly having people that she loves age past her and die. And she ends up in the care of this boy who can't talk and plays a flute all the time, and it is about their bond. But about half of the chapters aren't even from either of their perspectives. It's from other people who have different parts of this world that are interacting with their story, or they might be observing them. And this was just so well told. If you're talking about plot twists, the plot of the book actually surprised me. I, who have never known men, it's not really a plot twist, but the book was just really surprising. The Will of the Many, again, that ending had me on the floor. And then one that I haven't mentioned is The Fireborn Blade, which is a fantasy novella about our main character who is a female knight, where that's not a very common thing. She gets disgraced and she is determined to find the Fireborn Blade, which it has been prophesied can be taken by no man. But she's a woman, so maybe she could do it. Even though I felt meh about the book, that ending made me kind of want to continue. Then we have new to you favorite authors. So, I mean, I just talked about how this one blew me away. This wasn't even on my list. Again, V. Castro, James Islington, but I'd also like to mention S.A. Barnes, who wrote Dead Silence. This one had me on the edge of my seat. It's a sci-fi horror about a crew that comes across a very famous missing ship, but our main character is also a very nervous person. She has also suffered from hallucinations her whole life, and her hallucinations start to get worse on the ship, and then other people start to see things as well. So good, and I do have her next book. If you're talking authors newly inducted into my favorite authors of all time list, I have a rule where it's like, if you write 2 favorite series of mine or 3 favorite standalones, that you're a new favorite author, and I don't think anybody has checked the box yet. These 3 authors are pretty freaking close. Maybe I should just induct them now. And these 2 have potential to be inducted this year if I read their newest releases. Then there's the question of your newest fictional crush, which I feel like I don't really get that anymore. Closest I would get, Carmilla from An Education in Malice. I just want to treat this girl right. I think I was a little self-inserty with the main character in this book. I connected with her, and then I also was like, ooh, Carmilla cute. Then your new favorite main characters, I'm again gonna say Alejandra. I just was put in her shoes so much that I felt the weariness that she does. I also liked Vis from The Will of the Many. Oh my god, I keep talking about the same couple of books, but I thought that he was great. This is like the classic fantasy protagonist that you adore, who's got the nobility in him, but he's also having to do like spy stuff. It's a really fun line that he walks, and I think a lot of people will love him as a character. In the previous years, I have done my favorite villain. Can I say the main character from Yellowface? Because she sucks. She's awful. I hate her. I also think the opposing forces in Rhythm of War are just super cool. And I also have my favorite ensemble cast. It's gotta be The Vanished Birds. Vanished Birds, I love an ensemble piece. If I had known this was an ensemble piece going in, maybe I wouldn't have thought it was gonna be like a 3-star. I think that this really nailed telling a linear story, but through a bunch of different eyes while maintaining the same tone, but differentiating these characters. Sometimes we even float from character's perspective to character's perspective, and that might not work for a lot of people, but it worked for me. How about a book that made me cry? There is one book that I think I had to like put the book down because it made me upset, and that was Old Enough. This is about our main character who is going to college and trying to find herself, especially within her own queer identity, and she is having to deal with her former best friend is getting married, but she has a bad past with her best friend's brother, and her friend is not very kind to her about it. This is like a college coming of age story that is very rooted in like what it feels like to be like a college student right now. And I was so upset by some stuff that happened in this book. I think Black Cake actually made me tear up, which this is about two siblings who their mother died and left them an 8-hour long recording telling them everything about her life that she never said. A lot of emotional stuff happens in the mom's perspective, but what really made me emotional was the siblings reacting to the stuff that their mom is telling them. There is a book that made you happy, and the book I'm going to talk about for this is Here We Go Again by Alison Cochrane, which had me laughing and tearing up. So I could have said it for the last one, but I'm saying it for this. This is about two girls who were in middle school best friends and in high school enemies, and now they have come to work at their high school. Both of them are queer women, and their mentor, who was an out gay man who was their English teacher, is now on his deathbed, and his dying wish is that he wants the two of them to take him on a road trip from Washington to his house in Maine. And they have to work together to do this road trip despite hating each other because of something that happened in the past. I read all of this on a plane, and my boyfriend said that I was laughing a lot. There were some funny moments for sure, and it's also really emotional, of course, so there was a little bit of both here. Otherwise, let's go with Iris Kelly Doesn't Date. I wanted these two together so bad, and I was so happy when they did get together. Then we have the most beautiful book you've acquired this year. I have Masquerade by Owose Guyomi. This is an alternate history, historical fiction that is set in 15th century West Africa. And look at this cover. Obsessed. And I love the cover of A Sweet Sting of Salt. I don't normally like photographs, but I just think that this really gives a good tone. Evocation is also an awesome design. Then the last question is to talk about your end of the year TBR. What are you going to be reading? Obviously, I have over 60 books that I'm going to be reading before the end of the year, but what do I know I'm definitely going to be reading? For some of my reading challenges, I have Stories of Your Life and Others by Ted Chiang, which is a sci-fi short story collection. I have Lessons in Chemistry by Bonnie Garmis, which is a historical fiction about a female scientist. I have a couple of arcs that I have to read from Tor. This is the Dead Cattails Assassins, which is about a guild of assassins who are all people who have been resurrected from the dead and have no memory of their past lives. And The Sky on Fire by Jess Lyons, which is like D&D-ish, where our main character joins a band of adventurers and have to steal a dragon's hoard. I'm also going to be reading Shark Heart by Emily Habeck, which is about a woman whose husband is slowly turning into a shark, as well as some book club picks that I'm going to be reading, like The Lies of Locke Lamora and The Stardust Thief. Here are some other books that I can tell you that I'm definitely going to be reading before the year's out. And here's your favorite book adaptation of the year. I have only watched 2 adaptations that are of books that I've already read this year, and I just watched the Red, White, and Royal Blue movie, and I thought it was really cute. I thought it was good. I don't know how close it was to the original material, but it definitely gave me the same feelings. I think it cut down on some of the side characters, but it had to for the limit of time it had. And I also really liked how it integrated long distance communication into it, like texting and emailing and phone calls. I thought I did a really good job of that. Then we have my favorite posts that I've made this year. If you're talking about YouTube, I really liked my Dimension 20 recommendation video. I also made an Instagram post for this. I was so glad that it found its way to people who love Dimension 20 and people who like books, because those are my 2 favorite internet things. I also really like the Instagram post that I made that was fantasy terms. This is all about explaining different types of things in fantasy. What's high fantasy? What's epic fantasy? Hard magic, soft magic, what's that? I did a post explaining all that, and it actually went over really, really well. Even fantasy fans that I am friends with had something that they learned from this. But we have come to the end of the tag, so thank you so much for watching. Please let me know what your answer to these questions are. I'd love to know. If you'd like to follow me anywhere, my link is in the description to everything that I do on the internet: Instagram, Goodreads, Etsy, Discord for my book club. And of course, if you want to watch the many videos that I have coming out in July, make sure to hit that subscribe button. But again, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.